I wanted to start with what has happened in Switzerland with the peace summit and Putin's peace proposal. But you wrote a piece you recently on June 19th. The title is "Why Won't the United States Help Negotiate a Peaceful End to the War in Ukraine?" which is so important right now at this particular moment that we are seeing some sort of escalations between Russia and the United States. And could you elaborate on this article?
I think, Nima, the basic point is that the United States for 30 years believed that it did not have to negotiate, that it was so powerful that it can get its way, and that it doesn't therefore need or want to compromise on any issues. And this is arrogance that is extremely dangerous. The point of my article is this last week when President Putin said, well, we can negotiate, here are Russia's terms, and the United States quickly rejected that overture for negotiations. This is not the first time this has happened. This is a repeated phenomenon, basically for 30 years. The Soviet Union ended in 1991. The United States security figures started to tell themselves that the US is the unipolar power. It's the sole superpower. It's the indispensable country. It's the world's leader. It can do what it wants. And definitely, this is the philosophy of the neoconservatives. And that started with Richard Cheney, who was the US Secretary of Defense in 1992. It has been part and parcel of every single administration. Neoconservative means the US belief that it runs the world. That's it. Biden, who's an old man and lives in the past, says all the time, the US, hey man, that's the most powerful country, not in the world, but in world history. So Biden's idea is, yeah, we're so powerful, compromise with Russia? No way. And so we have had proposals by Russia, don't expand NATO. This has been the core of the issue. Don't leave the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Don't overthrow governments in our region. Abide by the Minsk agreements to give autonomy to the Donbass or eastern Ukraine. Make a new security arrangement with the US not based on NATO enlargement. Don't put your missiles near our borders. All of these proposals have been rejected by the United States, usually with the back of the hand, not even sitting down to negotiate them. And this is extremely dangerous. Now, when Putin made this proposal last week, he said that the terms for ending the war are that Ukraine should leave the four regions claimed by Russia, that is Lugansk and Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, and make no further claims over Crimea, and commit to neutrality. And then he says Russia will stop immediately any further military operations and details will be negotiated. Now, the US or Ukraine may disagree with parts of that. They should not disagree with the part about NATO. That is in everybody's interest that NATO not enlarge, because putting NATO right next to Russia is a recipe for World War III. So we should keep a space between the US and Russia. They are two ambitious, proud, nuclear superpowers. They don't need to have their militaries up against each other as a tripwire. So that should be accepted by both sides. That should be accepted by Ukraine. as Zelensky did in March 2022, and then stopped doing it when his handlers in the US told him stop talking about neutrality. So this is the first point. On the questions of territory, to my mind, Ukraine or the United States can respond, well, we don't agree with you on all of that territory. Here are our proposals. But instead, the US says, oh, this is bad faith, this is conquest, this is unilateral surrender. That's, to use a technical term, bullshit. This is a negotiating position. You don't answer it by saying, no, we don't negotiate with you. You answer it by saying, negotiate. And the US instead has answered it, it seems, with a major military expansion that is now reportedly underway, bringing weapons from all over the world, new weapon systems. We know Ukrainians are being dragged off the street physically. The jails are being emptied to send prisoners to the front lines to die almost instantaneously right now. None of this is necessarily supported by the Ukrainian people. The country is under dictatorship and martial law, period. Let's be straightforward about this. Zelensky's term is over. There were no elections. This is now just simply martial law. What do the Ukrainian people want? Do they want to fight to the last Ukrainian? Do they want peace? Do they accept neutrality? Oh, the US doesn't want to hear about any of that. That might be truth-telling. This isn't about truth. This is about power. This is about victory. And so this is where we are. It's very alarming because we're going to enter right now a new phase of military escalation. It's going to take us closer to nuclear conflict. There's no way it's going to save Ukraine, because if these fools in the West would get it through their heads, Russia is not going to allow NATO to expand to Ukraine, and it will escalate, including to nuclear war, if that's what it takes. And what they say is, oh, no, I don't think so. Well, stop gambling with my life and with our lives. You don't think so. What do you know? The people that run the show in Washington or London or Brussels have not proved to be very smart, have they? So I don't want them gambling with the world's survival. I want them to negotiate.
Yeah. When you look at the president of Serbia recently in an interview, he said that in 3 to 4 months, we're going to have a world war. And Hungary, Orban in Hungary is talking about that NATO is preparing to fight Russia. How do you find these type of comments? Do they know anything behind the scene that we are not aware of?
They know what is being said, but not being reported. They know that NATO is putting in thousands of personnel, most likely, into Ukraine. NATO is joining this fight, maybe or maybe not with soldiers with guns, but it's fighting it as the intelligence officials, the ones helping to man systems, now as hospital medical workers in the army and so on. NATO is on the ground, and it's increasingly on the ground. And don't trust the United States leadership right now for a moment. They face an election. They may be desperate. They're not very clever. Biden is way past his prime, and we don't even know what kind of control he has. Half the time he names the country wrong. So this is not safe, our situation right now. And when Vučić of Serbia or Orban of Hungary say these things, they're not just piping off. They're talking about what is being said, and even being said officially, not just informally. And they're telling the public, what are we doing? But the European leaders are so sad that not one of them dares to say a word that isn't in the US line. And the US line makes no sense. And so this is why it's so dangerous right now.
Yeah, recently we had new election in the European Union, and in your opinion, what was the message coming out of these elections? People are not happy. At least we know that people are not happy with the current policies in the European Union. They're talking about moving to the right wing, to the left wing. I think that the main issue is that the policies that are not making sense for Europeans. What's your take on these new changes that are happening?
First of all, I don't even know what far right means in this public debate right now. Much of the so-called far right wants to stop the war. It used to be far right was militaristic. Now that's the Greens. Who's the most militaristic party in Europe? It's the Greens of Germany. So what do these labels even mean anymore? They make no sense. So what we know, and I follow the opinion polls closely. For instance, people can look up Morning Consult, which runs approval ratings of European leaders. Almost nobody in Europe has any public support beyond a small amount. In Germany, Scholz's support is low 20s, Macron, 20s. Opposition, much higher. These are unpopular politicians. In my view, they're unpopular politicians because they're talking about war. They have led Europe into an economic stagnation and high inflation, which is directly the outcome of the Ukraine war. They talk about increasing military spending and the coming need to fight Russia. Well, I don't think the public finds much confidence in these leaders. This makes no sense. By the way, it does make no sense. Russia's not going to invade Europe. Russia is objecting to NATO coming into Ukraine. Why is that so hard for Scholz or Macron or Biden to understand? Why is it so hard for our mainstream media to tell the truth on this? The truth is simple, straightforward, endlessly repeated. Even Secretary-General Stoltenberg of NATO said, this is a war over NATO enlargement. Zelensky's own negotiator, David Arakhamia, said what Russia really wanted was neutrality. That was the point of the negotiations back in 2022. So what is wrong with us that we can't have an honest debate about this? And then I was told by an otherwise intelligent people, oh, Ukraine should have the right to choose its military alliance. But you know what? Russia has the right to say to the US, don't put your bases on our border. Just like the United States says to Russia, don't put your bases on our border. But the US doesn't believe in consistency. The US believes in power. So don't do as we do as we say. This is what can get us all killed, all this hypocrisy. The US should reflect, would it be fine if Mexico invites China to have military bases on the Rio Grande, on the border with the United States? If the US would say so, let's hear it. Let's hear Washington say, yeah, anyone can choose, Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, no problem. Anyway, the US will never say that. We've had the Monroe Doctrine for 201 years, since 1823. It says to the rest of the world, keep out of the Americas, not even up to our border. Keep out of the Americas. That's how arrogant the United States was even in 1823. It says this region, this whole hemisphere is none of your business, you keep out. But then when we want to meddle right up to Russia's border, that's just fine, that's freedom. Come on, again, this is bullshit. We need to get serious to stop the escalation of the war.
Yeah. Two other points in the Putin's preconditions was he He said that he's willing to negotiate on the basis of what they've been negotiating in Istanbul in 2022. And the other point would be that he said as time goes by, these conditions are so fluid that they're going to change. And when it comes to the West, we know that as time goes by, Ukraine gonna lose and lose more territory. And the question is why they're not considering any sort of negotiation. Do you think the question, what comes to my mind is Zelensky, it seems that he's continuing in his position under the martial law. And European leaders are not in a good position considering the new elections. They don't have any sort of majority support in the European Union. Biden, for the sake of 2024, he's willing to continue this conflict. I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to hand it over to the next president of the United States. It's his agenda, what he's going to do with the conflict. It seems that nobody's in favor of any sort of peace, any sort of political settlement in Ukraine.
That's correct, because the public isn't asked about this. If the public were asked in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United States, should Ukraine be neutral and safe, there would be an overwhelming answer, yes. But this is not what's being asked, because the public has no say in any of this. Nothing's being explained honestly. Ukraine is under martial law, as you said. The Ukrainian people aren't being asked. I watch pictures, I find them tragic, of people running for their lives from the conscription officers. They're being dragged into cars. They're being given a gun and then told to go storm a Russian location and then dying within a few days. They're being dragged off the streets to die. And that's Western policy. That's the so-called policy of fighting to the last Ukrainian. Now the Ukrainians have formally asked Europe, return Ukrainians that are in Western Europe so that they can be conscripted and go to the front line. Are we just a war machine? Is this just red meat for the front line? We'll see how Europe behaves. But so far, Europe has done whatever the US has said. That's the bottom line of Europe, whatever the US says. But the US leadership is completely irresponsible, and it is weak, and it has no strategy, and it's trying to get to past the next election, which is in November. And so they don't want anything embarrassing to Biden until then. It's not about Ukraine, it's about Biden's reelection. So everybody's quiet, except the guns, which now continue to escalate. It is a dramatic situation.
But considering the recent election in the European Union, do you think that these people who are hoping to make some sort of changes in terms of their leaders in Europe, are they going to get it? Or are they going to have a Meloni type leader that is so much in line with what's going on right now in Ukraine?
Well, we don't know, but one of the rumors last week was that the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, would become the High Representative for External Relations. Now, she's one of the most aggressively Russophobic politicians in the world. She speaks hate about Russia. And if that's the External Affairs Commissioner of the new commission, well, what could one say? It's a shame for me. I helped her father, who was central bank governor in Estonia, to introduce the Estonian kroon. It was a very successful operation that I helped to advise on. And her father's I like him very much. But I don't like Russophobia because it is arrogant, it is uncalled for, and it is dangerous. It's a matter of talking and settling issues that we need, not this kind of hate about Russia and Russian culture and this essentializing Russia. Oh, that's always a violent state. Well, that's baloney. The United States and the British Empire have been violent states. Germany has its Nazi period. Do we then talk about Germany as if it's only Nazi Germany? Of course we don't. We don't make such simplistic, simple-minded, insulting statements about other countries. We try to show respect, cooperation, and a way forward. And I don't see that coming out of Europe. These politicians trip over themselves to be more hate-speaking. Same with the United States. Well, it's enough. It's worse than elementary school. This is not how to behave for safety.
Yesterday, Stoltenberg said that China must stop supporting Russia in this conflict, and we're gonna sanction, we're gonna punish China if they don't do that. In your opinion, we've seen in recent months that Janet Yellen, where she went to China, we had Antony Blinken, we had Olaf Scholz, and we had Putin's visit to China that was so important. How do you find right now the relationship between China and Russia? Are they really thinking that it's possible to separate China from Russia or Russia from China?
There used to be an old joke that there's fog in the English Channel. Europe is cut off, as if Britain was the center of the world. And it wasn't Britain that was cut off from Europe, Europe was cut off from Britain. Well, in this Western idiocy, we run the show, China's a sideshow, China's isolating itself. These people don't do numbers. Add it up. The whole Western world, add up Europe, the European Union, 450 million people. The United States, 336 million people. Roughly together, 800 million people. Take Britain, add in Japan, add in Korea, add in Australia and New Zealand. You're getting to about 1 billion people out of 8 billion. That's 12% of the world population, 12.5%, 1 billion over 8 billion. You know what? We're talking to ourselves. They're not buying it. China's doing just fine trading with the rest of the world. We can't compete with their electric vehicles. We can't compete with their advanced technologies, their low-cost production. So we're becoming protectionist in our own borders. But we're threatening them. We'll cut you off. Well, you know what? We won't cut them off. They will live in a world in which the US and Europe are increasingly isolated. Of course, this is a terrible idea. But I don't like the US going to China to lecture China. China is 1.4 billion people. The United States is 336 million people. China's economy in international prices is about 30% larger than the United States, or maybe 25% larger than the United States. Come on. Some mutual respect and actually ending this war rather than all these threats and sanctions and all the things the United States is going to do to all the rest of the world. This is all part of the same story. It's this incredible arrogance that is incredibly out of date.
When it comes to these new tariffs that the Biden administration is placing on China, in your opinion, who's going to benefit from these new tariffs? The same policy, the same old policy coming from the Trump administration. He put 25%. Right now, it's 100% by the Biden administration. It seems the same old policy, the same policy, Republican, Democrat, the same. But who's going to benefit in the United States from these new tariffs?
Well, there are several dimensions to these tariffs, but two that are most important. One is that it aims to hurt China, And second, it aims to give protection to a part of the American economy, workers in the firms that compete with China, at the expense of all the consumers in the United States. So when it comes to the first, it does hurt China, but it also hurts the United States. This protectionism is just bad economics. Yes, China would be able to sell more goods to the United States. Those are blocked. To some extent, China sells to Vietnam, and then Vietnam sells to the United States, so it's just a relabeling of a lot of products. But to some extent, it means a real slowdown, a real loss of efficiency, a real loss of benefits to the American people who pay higher prices, face inflation, and so on. So that's one part. The second part is that this is protectionist, aiming at the swing states in American politics, which is the industrial Midwest: Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. These are swing states in the presidential elections. Trump used the anti-China rhetoric to help him win in 2016, and the Democrats said, well, we'll be protectionist too, so that we won't give up the benefit in the swing states. Of course, it hurts the rest of the economy, not in those states, but in the rest of the economy. Everybody pays higher prices, we have less efficiency, and of course, we have many more tensions. But there's another fact that's basic. China is the low-cost producer of electric vehicles, of advanced batteries, both for vehicles and for the scale of a power grid. China's the low-cost producer of long-distance power transmission. China's the low-cost producer of modular nuclear, fourth-generation nuclear. China is the low-cost producer of wind turbines. In many, many areas where the world needs these new low-carbon technologies, China's already the low-cost producer. I should add 5G, which will soon be 6G. So in all of these cases, China will outcompete the US and Europe. And Europe fell way behind on electric vehicles because the European, and especially the German auto manufacturers, like their internal combustion engines, and they drag their feet, and now China outcompetes them. And Europe is slowing down the changeover to electric vehicles, so it's violating its own Green Deal. But even worse, Europe's prosperity depends on selling cars not to China, not in Europe, but to the rest of the world. And what happens when German automotive companies are not competitive with China's in third markets? You can't use protectionism for that. That just is going to be a sheer loss of economic well-being for Europe. Could be quite significant unless Europe gets its act together to make this technology transformation faster. But don't blame China. They've been doing what they need to do, building out manufacturing capacity for the new green era. And when they did that, then the US government said, oh, you have overcapacity. Isn't that absurd? When we're trying to move to a new green economy, China makes some important steps, and then the US accuses it of overcapacity? Shame.